Welcome to today's lecture featuring Vice Admiral Michael Cowan in a discussion of humanitarian aid in Somalia. My name is Randy Goebel. I'm a principal consultant with the Shared Value Group and Live Better Publishing. We, along with AMSUS, are founding members of Health 21. Health 21 is an educational communications and boots on the ground advocacy initiative whose mission is to support a new vision of wellness and healthcare for the 21st century. We're focused on contributing to thought leadership, strengthening public-private relationships, encouraging civilian-military interoperability, and shaping the future direction of health for all. Today's lecture is scheduled for 90 minutes and allows time for Q&A and discussion. Because there are a number of people in the room with Dr. Kennedy, the conference call system in your room is live, and all participants can hear you. We ask that you mute your microphone until such time that any questions arise. For others who have connected remotely, we ask that you use the chat form on your screen to ask questions or share comments. After Admiral Cowan's presentation, there should be ample time for open discussion. And now I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Amy Kennedy, and she will in turn introduce our featured speaker. Dr. Kennedy?
All right, thank you. So Vice Admiral Michael Cowan is the Executive Director of AMSUS. He began his Navy career in 1971 as a General Medical Officer at Camp Lejeune. He was promoted to flag rank while serving as Commanding Officer at the same hospital 25 years later. Throughout his naval career, Admiral Cowan held numerous leadership positions, most notably as Deputy Executive Director of TRICARE, Chief of Staff to the Assistant Secretary of Defense Health Affairs, and Joint Staff Surgeon. He was a leading force for numerous initiatives to include creation of the National Disaster Medical System, defense policies for force health protection, and development of information systems. During Operation Restore Hope in Somalia from 1992 to 1993, Admiral Cowan served as Task Force Surgeon. In 2001, he became the 34th Surgeon General of the Navy and Chief Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. He earned his MD from Washington University in St. Louis and completed residency training at the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda. He is board certified in internal medicine, fellow of the American College of Physicians, and distinguished professor of military medicine at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. Admiral Cowan attended the National War College as a senior research fellow and is a certified executive of the American College of Physicians Executives. AMSUS was formed in 1891 and congressionally chartered in 1903 as the Association of Military Surgeons of the United States. It has evolved and grown in scope and mission to become the voice for all federal health professionals serving uniformed services, Veterans Administration, and other federal health agencies. Its annual continuing education meetings and journal, called Military Medicine, provide communication vehicles where individuals and organizations share and disseminate knowledge while developing professional associations and relationships. The nonprofit organization is dedicated to the goal of even better healthcare. So with that introduction, we welcome Admiral Cowan.
Thank you for that wonderful intro. Good afternoon. It's nice to virtually meet all of the attendees today. I'm comment up front. I'm sort of pleased that we're not going to have video on me. That picture is very old, and I really look a lot better there. So if you just kind of focus on that, then that's what I used to look like. Look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell a story. It's an old story now. It's 1993. But it was a pivotal time in military medicine. It was at that time, the largest humanitarian operation that had ever been conducted internationally. So I'm going to tell the story of this, then try to tease out some lessons that I think that we learned, that we did learn, and then open it up for discussion and questions. So I'd like to keep this very informal, and I'll simply go ahead and dig into it. In the spring of 1992, Somalia, which is on the Horn of Africa, Upper East Africa, developed a drought, which led to a famine. This is a very dry country. It's desert. Probably its two biggest exports are sand and gravel. Most of the people are nomadic farmers who have a subsistence life. They move from camp to camp where they feed and water their camels mostly and other animals, goats, and then move on. And at the best of times, they're calorically short. Drought started in '92 and persisted through the summer and fall. And as a result, political instability developed. The government collapsed and failed, and it became a failed state, meaning there was no law and order. There was nobody in charge unless he had a bigger gun than somebody else who thought he was in charge. Their society began to splinter, first along tribal lines, then clan lines, and then family lines. Literally became brother against cousin. And the non-governmental organizations, the international aid organizations, International Red Cross, Red Crescent, Irish Aid, Medicines Sans Frontiers, became victimized by clan warfare. They reached a point that they could not get supplies to the feeding camps. I'm not able to advance this for some reason. My buttons aren't working. Okay. Give me just a moment here. We did a trial run the other day and this worked just fine. Okay, buttons no work. So if you would help me, please.
Yes, I'll go ahead and advance the slides for you.
All right, that'll be fine. Word about this began to get out. The world became relatively outraged. The United Nations formed a response called UNISON, but the United Nations didn't have the resources itself to go into what was essentially a war zone. And so several Pakistani soldiers that had gone in to try to restore order had been killed. So the UN remet, invoked what's called Chapter 7 of their charter, which allows force to be used, convinced the United States to lead a task force, and Operation UNITAF, which was Operation Restore Hope, was formed. Next slide. To give you the bluff, that's the bottom line up front. The top picture was Mogadishu, Somalia in 1992 probably, and the bottom was Mogadishu, Somalia when I arrived. The country was absolutely destroyed. The population had filtered out into the countryside in these small family groups, and the NGOs were trying to bring mostly women and children together in feeding camps, but they couldn't get their heads out of the foxhole because of the rampant criminality. Next slide. There were two major industries. This is a typical site all around Somalia. Animals died of starvation and thirst. Small family units would go to a little wadi like this where there was a water well, water their livestock, munch, they'd feed on the grass, the sparse grass that was around. And about this time, these warring clans developed the habit of spiking the water wells. When they would pick up their family, they'd eaten the grass, pick their families up to go to someplace else. These roving gangs would come around and they would destroy the well. They would blow up the shaft or poison the well or something. So very few wells serving 15 or 16 million people were down to a few dozens of wells. Desperation. It was really a desperate situation. Next slide. This was typical traffic. These are called technical vehicles. That's what the Somalis call them. These various warlords had their lieutenants, their people. They took these Toyota pickups and Jeeps and things, mounted them with every manner of weaponry that they could get their hands on. And these guys ran around the countryside, frankly, killing people for fun of it. They would sometimes paint on the side of the fender the little stick figures of their victims. And I was told that if the victim was standing up, they shot him. And if the victim was laying down, that means they ran over him. I included the picture of the red vehicle on the lower left corner. If anybody has any blinking idea of what that thing is, it looks like they found a jet engine and mounted it backwards or side. No idea what that is. Next slide. These are the two industries. On the left, planes would fly in from Nairobi and Mombasa with cut and guns, and fly back out with everything that was looted. If you notice, I'm back to this picture in Mogadishu again. There's no telephone wires because they were stripped. They were gone. There are no window casings. If you go into these buildings, the electrical wires inside the buildings had been ripped out of the walls. The toilets and sinks were gone. Everything that could be picked up and sold somewhere else was, and there was it's a nation that had absolutely nothing left. Next slide. And this is the khat is a mild narcotic-like drug that people customarily chew. It gives a kind of a buzz, I guess. I'm not exactly sure of what its properties are. But when somebody's been munching on this stuff all day and they're running around with submachine guns in their hands, it's a very dicey situation. So all of this was mildly interesting to me. In December of '92, I was Captain Cowan then. I was stationed in San Diego, seeing patients at Balboa, and my main job was to be the quality assurance officer for all of the ships and stations with clinics around the Pacific Rim. So I was responsible for a lot of QA and seeing patients, living in an artist loft in the gas lamp section of San Diego. Life was pretty sweet. On December 7th of '92, my lovely wife, Linda, the unflappable Linda, as I came back in from walking my dog, said, "Honey, you've got some phone calls." And I said, "Oh, yeah, from who?" She said, "Well, from as nearly as I can tell, from every admiral in Navy medicine." So that's about a dozen different people. I said, "Oh." I said, "Well, who do you think I should call back first?" She said, "Well, I would call the Surgeon General first because he's called the most often and he seemed to be the most irritated." So I called the Surgeon General, and he told me that we had just launched Marines, which Navy medicine supports, to Somalia, and that they were leaving the next day. That the night before, the Joint Task Force surgeon, who was supposed to be responsible for the medical oversight, was relieved of his duties. He was thought not to have a sufficient plan, and the SG wanted me to go be that surgeon. Yes, sir. So Saturday I got on an airplane, and Sunday I was in Mogadishu, and we began operations. So a big change in my life. Next slide. When we got there, the situation was that most of the women and kids had been got themselves to these feeding camps that were run by Red Cross, Red Crescent, the other NGOs. The men mostly were busy with their particular warlord gangs, running around looting and fighting each other. It was a very dangerous situation. They were shooting virtually all the time. And the problem we went there to solve was simply that the international aid structure had aid. There was plenty of them to deliver it, but they couldn't get there because they couldn't drive down a road without being robbed. So the United States led a coalition of about 20 different nations. Next slide. Let's just go to the next slide. 24 different nations, so 40,000 military personnel flew into southern Somalia over the course of just a few weeks to set up humanitarian operations in a non-permissive environment. That is, the women and kids wanted us there to bring them food, and the men did not. To give you an idea of the culture, this is a very extreme aspect of it, but I'll tell you a quick story. There was a feeding camp just outside Mogadishu that was limited by the amount of water they could pull up from the well. So they could have had many, many more people go into that camp and get fed. So we delivered to them a diesel pump for the well to pump water up. It hadn't been done by hand. That night, one of the local warlords came in and stole the pump. The next day, the warlord showed back up and said to the director of the camp, you know that little crank thing, that you stick in and twist and it starts the diesel motor? I need that. What they were doing was taking this diesel engine to Kenya, and they were going to sell it for cotton and goods. And the director of the camp said, don't you know that these are your women and kids, and that we can save more of them if we have the pump? And he said, yeah, but I'd rather have the little handle. That man was so enraged, he said, this, showed him the handle. The warlord said, yeah, and the director told me that he threw it down the well. The pump never showed back up. And he didn't get shot, and he doesn't understand why. But that was the situation. It was really a dreadful, dreadful situation. Anyway, so we poured in December of 1992. Next slide. We were backed up by several ships, the USS Tripoli, and two other what are called gator freighters. This is a helicopter landing aircraft carrier, and the other two ships do the same thing. I just happen to have a picture of the Tripoli. So they were offshore supporting us, lots of logistics. The U.S. military can move a lot of stuff very quickly. Next slide. We established control of the streets, gave cover to the NGOs so they could start, so they could come out of their foxholes, established relief lines, food, water, medical care, infrastructure repairs, and almost immediately, it was the most gratifying thing of my life, how we stopped, the dying stopped. There was 1,000 people a day dying of starvation and disease and hunger and thirst. Almost overnight, and I would go back and forth to these camps, and just almost the little babies would go from that little skinny baby we showed a minute ago to starting to look like fat little normal babies in just a few weeks. It was like somebody pumped them up with air. There aren't words. So the streets, which had looked like the top picture, started to look like the bottom picture. People were able to come out. They would not be shot or run over or gunned down in the streets. Order, a certain amount of order was restored. And we did not go there to nation build. We did not go there to change Somalia. Somalia is a very old culture. A 7th century Somalian would have been very comfortable in 20th century Somalia. Their language actually was not transcribed until the 1970s. It was never written down. So we didn't go there to make a democracy. We just went there to stop the dying. And that happened so quickly that frankly, it's a highlight of my life. Next slide. Now, the NGOs didn't really need much of our help medically. My job was protection of our forces from a very disease-ridden place, very dangerous place, bullets flying around all the time, and to provide whatever assistance we could to help the mission go forward. So we were a marginal increase to these very capable non-governmental organizations. Also, they didn't want a lot of help from us, because if we went out and started seeing patients, on the street corner and delivering naval medical care, that shows up on television, and they told us absolutely point blank that when that kind of thing happens, their gifts, their funding starts to dry up. Donors say to them, "Why should we give to Irish Relief when the United States Navy is out there delivering healthcare?" They also very correctly pointed out that when we would go do something directly, do direct interventions, we did some, particularly in the surgical realm, that we changed the standard of care and changed the expectation of care. And so while that may be good for the person that we did something to using Western medicine, the next one that came along says, "Hey, how about me? Hey, Red Cross, Red Crescent, how about me?" And so what we did was backed up and said, "All right, what can we do?" Well, there's this Kisani Hospital, busiest trauma center, I believe, in the world, run by Somali doctors, and they did more trauma surgery than is imaginable. But at that time, they only had airway unprotected general anesthesia to perform surgery, and you all know that there's a significant mortality and morbidity rate with that. And so we went out and got our orthopods and our guys who knew how to, and we had a neurologist, we had a couple of anesthesiologists, people who knew how to do regional and local nerve blocks, and taught them. We give courses on nerve blocks. The U.S. Navy has arguably the best medical repair technicians in the world. They can fix anything. So we called them in off the ships. And those ships have fairly substantial hospital setups. So they've got med techs, med repair techs. We called them in and sent them to all the local hospitals with the following instructions: fix stuff. Everything is broken. EKG machines are broken, cars are broken, ambulances are broken, laboratory equipment is broken. The country's been paralyzed for over a year. Go fix stuff. And they got these hospitals working again. They fixed the electrical generators, for crying out loud. As we went through this process, we began to learn lots of things, and I would submit that a lesson that is learned by events like this is that frankly, they really aren't anything like you think they're going to be. We didn't have any idea of the kind of cultural considerations we would have to make when we would go out and provide any medical assistance. We couldn't just set up on a street corner somewhere and help people, because that could be the border of two rival clans, and that would cause people, including us, to get murdered if one clan was being favored over another. We couldn't speak the language. It's a very obscure language. We had very few translators. And coordinating with civilian volunteer organizations with the NGOs wasn't really all that much easier. They have their own cultures. They're each different. Their cultures are very different from the culture of the military. They never were happy that force had to be used for them to get out there. And so they basically wanted us to do what we came to do, but get out of there as soon as possible. So we have all of these cultural and organizational issues that I had, frankly, never seen coming, and made me realize that for my job, which was to make all these pieces work together, where I thought agility might be the most important, it really turned out to be a little bit of humility to make sure that everybody was fully invested in anything that we were trying to do. Next slide. What actually happened was, by official estimate, 100,000 lives were saved. The war stopped, and it never really got cranked up and started again, even after we left. But what everybody remembers is Black Hawk Down. That actually occurred after I left. I was not in country. This was the following summer of '93. And it's a shame that our attention is so focused on things like this and not the good of a really highly successful international humanitarian operation. Next slide. So what we did was we pulled off this huge operation, saved lives, stopped the war. We didn't nation build, but we didn't try. We didn't solve Somalia's problems, but we did stop the war temporarily. Next slide. I discovered, I kind of knew this, but you know, if you sort of have to feel things to really know them. It's not enough to know them. You have to, in your head, you have to have it in your heart. You know, if facts changed our behaviors and guided our behaviors, then not a single person in the world would smoke. We all know that's bad for you, but lots of people do. Food shortages are caused by nature. This famine was caused by politics. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And conventional wisdom is not always so wise. I love Dirty Harry. I love both Dirty Harry and Yogi Berra, so you can read those quotes for yourself. I think this would be a point that I could stop and see if there are any questions or comments. I will, while I'm waiting for questions, I'll add one. The image and the popular conception of military is that they just break things and hurt people. And to some extent, that's always been true. That's always been the primary mission, to do those things when they have to be done. The mission of today's modern military is very different. Our military exists to not fight. We are a deterrent force. Everything that we are structured to do is to be strong enough and convincing enough that we don't fight, particularly in a nuclear age, and this is particularly pertinent with all the saber rattling around North Korea. To do that, the realization has come to our government over the years, and really focused within the last 5 years, that waiting to use the military only after everything else has failed is an underutilization of military. That using the military to help nations avoid or get through the kind of conflicts that end up starting a road to warfare, to nation build, to respond to disasters, is an integral part of the mission, because at the end of the day, the mission of the military is to protect the American people. And so I have been alone in my career. I have been in Ismailia, Egypt, where I was the medical officer for a Suez Canal reclamation project. Somalia, of course. After 9/11, the Navy sent the USNS Comfort to New York City to serve as the Comfort Inn, where we took care of, fed, bathed, clothed, gave a bed to up to 1,000 firefighters and rescuers a day. The USNS Mercy responded to the Indonesia earthquake, saving, I think, countless lives there. And I was also in the response to Haiti, following their tragic earthquake. So if you have an idea that the military is just there to fight, that's really kind of the mission of last resort. And more we've seen this kind of thing, like Somalia, that the medical mission, the humanitarian aspect of the mission, is in the forefront. That was an advertisement from my sponsor. Questions?
Think we have any questions for now?
No, I don't think we have any questions. It was a wonderful presentation. Anyone else?
All righty.
No?
Well, we've given you all back 20 minutes of your life then.
Well, we thank you very much. Very informative.
Thank you, and thank you for your attention. I will tell you a final note. Should any of you, and many of you might, become engaged in something like this, you can count on paying a personal price. I am pretty sure that nobody who was on this mission escaped without some degree of PTSD, and that me too. I had sleep disorders and mood disorders for several months. I got over it, and talking to my shipmates, they all did too. And I suppose maybe that's the final lesson of this kind of things. You can think that you're hardened. You can think that you're, that you're emotionally and psychologically up to that, where things like this will roll off your back, but they just don't. All right. Well, that's all that's all I've got.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Well, that concludes the lecture today. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and especially thank you, Admiral Cowan, for sharing your experience and insights.
All right, you bet. Been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.